Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Very good to see you again in the chair. Islanders sometimes ask me what the purpose of these debates are, and the answer is a simple one. They are occasions for me, as the Member of Parliament for the Isle of Wight, to raise issues of importance for the island, and to do so on the public record, so in Hansard, and then to get an answer, a considered response from a Minister of the Crown, who in this case is my honourable friend, the member for North Dorset, and I welcome him into his new role. His predecessor was good enough to visit the island and engage in this issue very consistently, and I know that he has some big decisions to make in a very short amount of time, so I shall help him make those decisions as much as I can by trying to make as strong a case as I can. And the critical thing I'm going to be arguing in this debate, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that the Isle of Wight is the largest island by population in England, and it is the only island authority in the UK, an island being separated by sea from the mainland, which does not receive a permanent uplift to council funding to reflect the additional costs of separation by sea from the mainland. So I'm going to make two arguments here. First, why is the Isle of Wight treated differently to every other island with a sizable population which is separated by sea from the mainland, and secondly, to work at looking at what that uplift in financial terms would be. I got a letter from the Minister a couple of hours ago, and in it he said island funding is an issue you've raised with the Department numerous times, and I'm pleased that we are progressing this issue to this stage. He's certainly right that I've raised it numerous times. I've raised it on dozens of occasions, but the most significant ones about debates in the House, letters to Prime Ministers, were on the 9th of May 2018, 25th of September 2019, twice in October 2019, twice in October 2020, 15th of June 2021, 10th of August 2021, 30th of November 2021, 28th of November 2022, 26th of November 2023, and as I say, on multiple occasions in between. We don't get an island factor, and as I say, we're the only island that doesn't. We were recognised to have that analysed in the fair funding formula, and it was the current Prime Minister, when he was in my right honourable friend's role as the local government minister, who committed in the fair funding review and the fair funding formula to look at the cost of providing services on an island and the Isle of Wight. So it was the now Prime Minister who committed to that. Very sadly, thanks to COVID, that fair funding review was never implemented. But I consider this to be a historic injustice that has effectively gone back to the era of modern government, which was started in the 1960s. There is a generalised rule for islands that is not being applied to my constituency of the Isle of Wight. There is no logic and consistency to that position, and I suspect it would be one that would be difficult to defend either morally here or indeed legally in a court of law, because one of the principles of modern governance is the idea of consistency, and with that the idea of fairness, neither of which seems to apply in this case. I'm looking at now a series of major studies. Since 1989, there have been 6 major studies into the impact of separation by sea on the funding of public services on the Isle of Wight. The most recent was published by the University of Portsmouth. I'm very grateful to the University of Portsmouth for their work on this, and it shows the value of actually working with academic institutions who do really good quality peer-reviewed work. Portsmouth argued that the additional cost, or the additional cost of providing government services on the island, were up to 25% of net expenditure. They identified 3 factors that inflated our costs and made it difficult to provide government services for the same amount of money. And the problem here, for my right honourable friend, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is the methodology. If your inputs are incorrect, your outputs will not be correct either. And if nobody is taking into account the additional costs of providing government services because the methodology does not allow that, you will not get fair and consistent outputs either with other authorities of the same size, nor indeed with islands. So, back to Portsmouth. They identified 3 factors. The lack of a spillover of public goods between the mainland and the Isle of Wight, which forces us to be self-sufficient, but at cost. Secondly, the island premium, higher prices charged by suppliers on the island because there's a smaller market, combined with the ferry costs, which I'll come to briefly in a minute. And thirdly, the additional costs to the island that result from physical and perceived dislocation. Personally, I don't understand why anyone wouldn't want to live on the Isle of Wight, but considering there's 8 billion people on the planet, it's probably quite good that most people choose not to. But it does make it sometimes quite difficult for us to find experts and people in the senior doctors for NHS, for example. So those are the three factors. I want to make clear at this stage that since I became the Member of Parliament in 2017, working with other people, the NHS, the Council, we've got and delivered a better deal for the island. We've got major investment in the NHS, the railway's undergone significant repair, Isle of Wight College is about to be demolished and rebuilt as we speak. Both our levelling up bids have been accepted, we've saved shipbuilding in East Cowes, we've got 20 million Towns Fund for Ride, we've got 175 million in total, which is buying better health service, better jobs, better life chances for my constituents, and I'm proud of that record. But that 175 million and the good things it buys, these are capital sums, and the issue here is the annual funding settlement to the council, which is it's not all about getting that. It is an element of getting a better deal. We've got a better deal in many areas, but I want a better funding settlement for my council. Related to all this, the elephant in the room is the ferry costs, which are some of the highest in the world. I'm not going to dwell too long on this because I obviously want to hear the Minister's, I'm sure, eloquent response to my arguments. But we have some of the most expensive ferries on earth. We've had lots of good individual ideas about what to do about it, but we've never had a shared manifesto that the MP and the Council can agree on. The Islands Council, despite being the Transport Authority, has no powers over the ferries and, as far as I can see, has never taken a policy position. We have the Transport Infrastructure Board under really great leadership of Christopher Garnett, but the ferry firm's participation is voluntary. And I think that's wrong. I understand that the ferries soon will start to have discussions about grants and government support to move to net zero. And I believe at that point, when public money is being spent by them, should be a quid pro quo. And that is a service obligation of some kind, a public service obligation of some kind, or potentially, and I'm moving towards this idea of a Solent ferry regulator, which would have the legal power to sign off on timetables, on debt levels, on changes to ownership and other issues related to the ferries. I also believe that the Council should have a seat on both Whiteling and Red Funnel boards. I'm going to leave the ferries element there because I'm going to develop that in the new year, but it is absolutely part of the additional costs that the island faces and adds cost to everything physical that we try to get over, but simply having people come over as well. And in fact, I think there's a fair funding formula that said the additional costs of a foot passenger is about 35 miles in terms of time and cost. And for a vehicle passenger or bringing stuff onto the Isle of Wight, it's the equivalent of an additional drive from London to Peterborough, so about 70 miles in terms of cost. Going back to all the reports that we've had on the Isle of Wight, the most recent one, and indeed it was one commissioned last year by one of the my honourable friend's predecessors, was one by a company called LG Futures, which is a local government think tank which does good work for local government in developing ideas, etc. That was commissioned by the government to review the evidence for the additional cost, to work out the additional cost of providing public services on the island. LG Futures concluded that and they effectively peer-reviewed all the evidence, every relevant study undertaken independently being the key word here, Mr. Deputy Speaker, confirmed the additional costs of providing a parity of public services on the island. So the critical points are these, that the island cannot simply access the services provided by neighbouring authorities because we're separated by sea. We have the dislocation and the island factor eloquently outlined in the University of Portsmouth reports, and indeed reports going all the way back to the Edwards Commission in the 1960s. And therefore, the island provides fewer services compared to comparative councils, comparative neighbours, other unitary authorities. And that is why we believe the current system is unfair. Now, this year, I'll speak for another 8 minutes or so, because I know that I want to make sure that the Minister can get a word in edgeways, frankly, Mr Deputy Speaker. I persuaded the Government to reopen the examination of Ireland funding earlier this year, and I thank his predecessor very much for doing so. We've engaged closely with his department, and in fact, probably the work that we've done this year is the most detailed to date. Throughout this process, the Isle of Wight have gathered all the data that we have been able to do so, and making estimations where we haven't been able to gather that statistical data. One of the issues that we've come up with is that perfect data is not readily available, and therefore a level of ministerial judgment here is needed. But in our evidence, that we believe that in terms of total net expenditure, unit costs on the island are about 14% above the average of our statistical neighbours, so above our like neighbours. So when Portsmouth say up to 25% and zero being no change, the estimates that we've come up with this summer, working with his department, show a 14% additional cost. Now, I know that there's a series of letters, and I know that he wants to have another look at the evidence. He's writing to us perhaps again. I'm very grateful for that, because it's another chance for us to make our case. And once we provide that evidence again, I would like to speak to the Minister, if he would have time again, just to make sure that he understands the arguments that we're presenting. His own government department has now said that there may be additional costs associated with island status, and I'm quoting from his department. And I'm grateful for that acceptance of our case. It is somewhat hedged because, we're dealing with public servants. There is a degree of ministerial judgment here. I disagree with the equivocation. There are clearly associated costs. The question is, for me, a question of how much. Unless the Minister seriously wants to argue today that you can provide the same level of public services for the same money on an island with a smaller market, with hyper-expensive ferries, as you can on the mainland. With great respect to him, I'm sure he won't be making that argument, but with great respect, that would simply not be a credible argument. Which brings me back to the core point. There is the issue of the principle here. Why is the Isle of Wight treated differently from other islands, which are effectively the same, separated by sea? And once we accept that principle, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what is the monetary value put on this? If you look at England's only other island authority, the Isles of Scilly, their uplift, their island factor is 50%, 50%. It is different from the Isle of Wight, it's smaller. I get that. And there is an increased difficulty providing services. But that is a 50% uplift. If you look perhaps as more comparative ones, with the Special Islands Needs Allowance in Scotland, that provides a 10% uplift in general funding for Orkney, for Shetlands and for the Outer Hebrides. For councils with significant population, that allowance is allocated at between 5 or 20 or 50%. But in all cases, it is recognised, a simple fact is recognised here, and that is that there is an island uplift because it costs more to provide government services on an island. So again, I come back to my central point. I would like very much to ask the Minister, and I've sent him my speech early, I've edited and tweaked it a little bit, but he's had a copy of it for a day or so, for the government to accept in principle that the Isle of Wight should have an island uplift as all other islands separated by sea from the mainland would do, and then to work with me for the Council's experts to find a number. For me, the most important element of this is the acceptance of that the Isle of Wight should be treated equally, which I think is legally and morally justified, as an island as others are. We negotiated last year what the government described as a temporary uplift. It's about £1 million. I would like to see that uplift at the heart of an island settlement, an island factor, and then frankly increased, because £1 million, I'm very grateful for it, but it is not a great deal of money. So summing up, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'm very grateful that the Minister has listened so closely, and I really appreciate the work he's doing on this. I know it is a complex area, and he's trying to balance lots of things. I would say a significant uplift on for the Isle of Wight is effectively an accounting error for most large councils in this country. So relatively modest sums will make a great deal of difference. For example, enabling us to keep our regeneration team. We need that regeneration team. We had 2 levelling up bids accepted, which shows we need that money, and it shows that we had the professionalism to go out and get it and to put good cases. And if we are down to if we have no non-discretionary spending at all, it makes it very difficult for us to build a future that we want for islanders. So the Isle of Wight is an exception to this current rule, and I think that is wrong. And I think we're seeing a historic injustice. The studies suggest that our island status, the factor of being the Isle of Wight, makes it between 14 and 25% more expensive to provide similar sets of services, between 10 and 60 million pounds. So I urge the government and I urge the minister to continue to talk with me, and on the first point to recognise that the island should be treated the same as other islands separated by sea, and secondly, then to work to provide a realistic figure which will make a difference to my constituents and to my council. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker, and may I begin by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for the Isle of Wight, for not only securing this important debate, but for advancing the argument in the way that he has. Can I also, Mr Deputy Speaker, add my thanks to Wendy Pereira, the Chief Executive of my honourable friend's council, to Councillor Phil Jordan, the leader, and of course to Chris Ward, the Section 151 officer. They all work very closely with my department, advocating as they do for the Isle of Wight, as my honourable friend does, and my department and I are very grateful to them for their engagement over the period. Let me start, Mr Deputy Speaker, by stating that the government is of course committed to serving the needs of diverse communities across our country, and this debate has provided an excellent opportunity to discuss the island communities for whom the honourable member for the Isle of Wight, my honourable friend for the Isle of Wight, has long been an effective campaigner. I know that my predecessor, as he has mentioned, as Minister for Local Government, visited the island recently and found that visit immensely helpful to hear from local voices on the issues faced by island authorities. Now, I have a confession to make, Mr Deputy Speaker. I have never visited the Isle of Wight. So if my honourable friend would like me to undertake a state visit with full pomp and ceremony, flags and tan bands playing, I would of course be delighted to, except I just warn him, I do get a little seasick, so we better choose a slightly calm sailing day. Let me also say to my honourable friend, and I say this in no way to rile him. I've heard what he has had to say, as my predecessor has, as officials in the department have done also. He should not take it personally, and I know he doesn't. But I've yet to hear in the 9 days I've been in this job, or in the 8.5 years I've been in this place, at any time, any right honourable or honourable member doing cartwheels up and down the library corridor or across Central Lobby, declaring how perfectly satisfied they are with their local government settlement. There is always room for improvement. Now, my honourable friend in the House will know that the local government finance settlement is, of course, in progress. And I want to give as much correct information in as timely a fashion as I can throughout that process to local councils across the country. So against that backdrop, at very much early doors, as it were, Mr Deputy Speaker, I know that my honourable friend will appreciate that I can't and I won't preempt the formal process of decision and determination making. But I hear very clearly what he has said both in this debate and in representations. He's referenced very kindly, and it shows that the systems are working, that he's in receipt of my letter of today's date. It may just, Mr Speaker, be of convenience just for me to read into the record a paragraph or two of those, that we have concluded the evidence gathering part of this process. And I would like to take this opportunity, this is me reading the letter, to take this opportunity to once again thank you, that's my honourable friend, and the Isle of Wight for your cooperation throughout this process. Island funding is an issue that he's raised with the Department on numerous times, and I am pleased we have progressed this issue to this stage. My officials are currently assessing the evidence submitted by the Isle of Wight Council and intend to share a draft of the report for comment to Council officers in due course. But it will be, let me make this assurance to my honourable friend, it will be in the process of making final determinations on the funding settlement, not afterwards. So it will be done in a timely and sequential way. The Council will, of course, then have the opportunity to comment on the report, and my officials and I are, of course, happy to respond to any further questions and comments that may arise from that process. Let me also say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the oft go-to phrase of a minister at the dispatch box is to refer to an honourable or right honourable friend as a doughty champion. It is a phrase that we know sits well in the parliamentary vocabulary. But if that phrase is to be worn as a crown, I say in all sincerity to my honourable friend, and this I hope should give confidence to his constituents and to those other deliverers of public service across the Isle of Wight, that if it's a crown, then based on the list of correspondence and strong representation that my honourable friend makes not just to my department but to across departments in government, then that crown fits his head as if it was bespokely tailored for it, and I congratulate him for all that he does on behalf of his constituents. They should be very proud that they have such a doughty champion. Now, let me turn to the hard figures. We recognise, as a statement of principle and fact, the key role that local government plays in and across our communities. The word that we share is, of course, government, central and local. And in my time, as long as the Prime Minister has me holding this post, I want to advance a relationship of cordial relations and cooperative and collaborative working. We are all focused, whether it's in Town Hall or in Whitehall, on serving the needs of people. And very often those people can be some of our most needy and vulnerable constituents. And the work that local government does in helping to meet those needs is profound and widely recognised. My honourable friend has, of course, referred to the funding settlement for the Isle of Wight. This year's local government finance settlement for the island was, of course, £162.9 million. Now, that was an increase from the previous year in core spending of over 10%. And as a local authority which has responsibilities for social care, and of course the demographics of a location such as the Isle of Wight will throw up particular challenges, as they do though in many rural areas across the country, then I know that the Council benefited from the additional funding in social care announced last year, receiving an increase of over £4 million in its social care grant allocation, and that was in addition to funding from the improved Better Care Fund and the Market Sustainability and Improvement Fund. This increase was above the average of 9.4% for local authorities across England, and overall the government made available up to £59.7 billion for local government, an increase in core spending power of up to £5.1 billion when compared to 22-23. Now, my honourable friend is absolutely correct to say that the challenges and opportunities faced by island communities differ greatly from other authorities in England. The separation from the mainland by water can lead to increased costs in some areas. And I say, pausing there for a moment, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as a Member of Parliament for a rural constituency, the additional costs of delivering public service in a rural area. I have long argued in speeches and representations to ministers from the back benches also have additional costs, and I would always urge should be taken into account. And of course we do this through the Rural Services Delivery Grant. Of course I can play.
I'm so grateful that you give to it, and I completely accept the argument about isolation in rural areas, be it Dorset, be it Cumbria. But there is an additional, and the Isle of Wight actually large part qualifies for those rural areas as well. But there is a specific additional cost which comes from ferry use in terms of time and in terms of funds and in terms of the inability or the greater difficulty in sharing services. Does he accept that point?
The fact that the best way to get to the Isle of Wight is by ferry is not, I think, something that any Minister of the Crown would wish to dispute with anybody who lives on the Isle of Wight. That is, of course, true. And I will turn to that in a moment or so. But I hope he recognises that that is something which the government has taken into account, and I intend to continue taking into account within my deliberations. And it is, of course, for this reason, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the government has consistently stood alongside the islands of our country to provide additional support in recognition of the very unique circumstances that they face, as my honourable friend has set out for the House this afternoon. And as my honourable friend will be aware, the Isles of Scilly, for example, received bespoke funding at the local government finance settlement for this. Now, our response to his calls previously for government and my department to recognise that, of course, is that in recent years, as he has noted, we provided an additional £1 million in grant funding to the Isle of Wight in light of the exceptional circumstances faced by the authority. Now, I'm pretty certain that my honourable friend would have liked that money to be more. But again, I say to him as well, I have to take, and the government has to take, decisions in the round against a whole series of interdepartmental calls for public money and very strong calls for public money within the department for different elements of the delivery of local government. It's why I said earlier in my remarks to my honourable friend, not as some sort of flippant point, but as a serious one, for him not to take it personally. I receive and am receiving representations from across the House and from across the geographies of our kingdom with regards to how the government will be supporting local government this coming year. Let me just say a word or two, if I may, about evidence-based and evidence gathering. My honourable friend has mentioned that my department has worked, I believe, productively with the Isle of Wight Council this year on evidence gathering to help us better understand the additional costs faced by the island. And as he highlights, it is challenging to quantify an island effect. But I hope that my honourable friend will agree that the joint work on the evidence gathering exercise has been a valuable process, both for the Isle of Wight and this government. And let me assure him, and through him his constituents, that my department and I will make the very best use of this information provided by the Isle of Wight Council in order to come to a decision. Too often I fear some of these things are commissioned, looked at, a window that has a slightly dodgy sash realises that it needs a bit of a prop if you want ventilation, and these reports are used for that purpose, or for a door to be propped open whilst coming in and out. The documentation submitted will be on my desk, and it will be at the forefront of my mind when I look at the figures with regards to the settlement for the coming financial year. And as always, we will be announcing our proposals, which are of themselves subject to consultation, in the upcoming local government finance settlement. We shall do that in the usual way later this year. The process hasn't been, if I may just finish this point, and then of course I'll allow my honourable friend in, the autumn statement, which I know many have welcomed, was of course reasonably late by comparison, Mr Deputy Speaker, this year. That means that my officials and department are going to have to work at pace in order to get the figures out to local authorities for them to think about their draft budgets, and also for us to undertake our consultation. I have set two criteria or two challenges, I suppose, for my officials, with whom, let me just pause if I may, Mr Deputy Speaker, and just say, albeit only 9 days in the job, I have unchallengeable support and admiration for, the most phenomenal team of public servants, fully seized and alert to the challenges of delivering public service in the local government arena. But the challenge I have set them, they have risen to it, they've accepted them with alacrity, is that the data which we provide to local authorities must be delivered in as timely a fashion as possible, and more importantly, any figure work which we provide to them must be correct and beyond peradventure. And I, of course, give way to my honourable friend.
I'm most grateful to my honourable friend for giving way again. He'll be delighted to know the invitation to visit the Isle of Wight is in his private office as we speak. Tennyson used to invite people in poetry. I'm afraid, just because of the time, I've done it in prose. But for many of the figures that he's talking about, we will be able to get Chris and Wendy and others, and indeed the NHS, to come and talk about those additional costs, and hopefully he will be able to see proper physical, practical examples to back up the numbers that we provided. Thank you.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend and to his uber efficiency in organising such a trip. My Speedos will be dusted off, and I hope to share a 99... Don't get excited, Mr Deputy Speaker. I hope to share a 99 with him at some bracing seaside venue during that visit. But in sincerity, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I look forward to that hugely. So what else can I say? I suppose in drawing my remarks to some form of a conclusion, I hear the representations that my honourable friend has made. I hope that he has heard in turn my very clear commitment from the Treasury bench this afternoon of my total commitment to studying with great care, as my predecessor did and my officials do, all and any submissions made by him and by his council. And we hope to arrive at a circumstance and solution which works for the people of the Isle of Wight. It is also, I think, worthwhile to mention, and my honourable friend was kind in his remarks to reference this as well, that in terms of government support to the Isle of Wight, that is manifest out with just the local government finance settlement. We are also investing in key capital projects across the island as part of our aim to level up all parts of the country, and the fantastic and magnificent work that my honourable friend, the member for Redcar, the Levelling Up Minister, is testimony, I think, to that work. Just three things, I suppose, that the island has benefited from in recent funding announcement. £20 million for the Towns Partnership Endowment, which will support the town of Ryde in the development of a new long-term plan. £5.8 million in round one for the East Cowes Marine Hub, and only this week £13.6 million from the Levelling Up Fund to deliver the Island Green Link, providing cycle and walking infrastructure extending from Ryde in the east to Yarmouth in the west of the island. So I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this issue. I hope that whilst I'm not able to give him the figures in pounds, shillings, in pence, I hope at least, Mr Deputy Speaker, I've been able to persuade him of the seriousness with which I take his case and the seriousness with which I will approach this issue over the coming weeks and months. I am committed, as is the government, to ensure that we can all do as much as we possibly can in order to ensure that our fantastic councillors, not just in the Isle of Wight, but across the United Kingdom, can work alongside us in order to deliver for all of our constituents.
Well, I have been to the Isle of Wight. It's beyond glorious. And all I can say is the Minister and his Speedos are in for a real treat. The question is that this House do now adjourn. May I let everyone say aye? Aye. Or the contrary, no? I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.